Olivier Da Lage, welcome to Paris Live. Thank you for being my guest.
Thank you.
Now, we're going to be taking a look at a book that you've written, Mr. Singh's Rickshaw, which was released in June in English. And I've read the book, so now I'm part of a kind of an exclusive club. And what's interesting is that it returns to a country that you have been to many, many times over the years, India, and a country you have a great passion for, it seems. And I just wanted to start with that point. What draws you to India?
My wife, she's Indian, and chiefly from Bombay, because actually the book is not about India as such. It's rather about Bombay, or Mumbai as you want. I mean, that's what is considered the economic capital of India.
So this was the starting point for your passion for India.
Yes, I'm
your the first port of call, perhaps, or the first discovery.
Definitely, and where I go every year, where I have a base, and I grew to like very much Bombay, which in itself is not necessarily a pleasant city. I mean, it's polluted, it's noisy, it's not exactly beautiful, but it's full of life, full of spirit, and I try to actually about that Bombay thing. There is one new restaurant, kind of fusion restaurant, which emerged in one of the old mill factories, which was destroyed, and then it's a new district which is being totally built. They say Mumbai is the city, but Bombay is a passion, and I think it captures very well the spirit of Bombay.
Interesting. Now, it is a murder mystery, but it has also a historical and archaeological aspect to it. But just beginning with the murder mystery part, is it a genre of writing that you are particularly fond of? Because it flows very, very easily, very, very quickly. We get involved in this story of who killed this professor, and we want to know more. And you seem to have a knack to kind of get the reader in with a couple of details. Is it something that you particularly like reading and maybe writing in this style?
Well, this is the first crime story I've been writing. I've been writing several thrillers, but mostly political fiction thrillers. This is the first crime story, so to speak. But I do read a lot of thrillers, whether espionage or crime stories.
Okay, so it is something that as a reader you appreciate
Right.
this style. Now, there are a couple of key characters I noticed in the book who are women. In fact, there's a police officer, one of the police officers, and also a journalist who keeps digging and kind of frustrating the police officers in this story. Was it important to you to have a balanced reputation, men and women in the story as characters, or was it just a complete coincidence?
Neither. I mean, truth be told, I mean, I didn't think of keeping a balance, gender balance in the characters, but it seemed obvious to me. And also it corresponds to the truth, I mean, to the situation. If you watch Indian TV programs, there are many women announcers, reporters, men also, obviously. I mean, it's true that India is considered to be a very difficult country for women. At the same time, there are very successful women in India everywhere. And I think this is part of that complex setup, which is the society which you call India.
Now, you've written many books, some fiction, some non-fiction. Is this the first time you've translated into English?
That's right. I mean, that was my frustration, that none of my previous books were translated into English. And this one taking place in Bombay, where English is widely spoken. I wanted to hit the Indian market. So I did the translation myself, but I'm not fully, I'm not a native speaker, so I had it revised by a professional editor in India. And yes, this is the first time I have an English published book.
Yeah, so it would have also added to the experience of writing your first crime thriller and your first book in English.
That's right.
Now, what's interesting also in the story, as I mentioned, there's a historical aspect to to the story about the origins of Hinduism, which is a very sensitive subject in the country still today.
It is highly sensitive because Hindu nationalists, who refer to the theory of what is called Hindutva, after the book published in the 20s by Savarkar, who is not the founder of nationalist Hinduism, but he's definitely one of the theoreticians. Basically, it means that every religion which is not born on the Indian subcontinent is alien to the culture of India. That refers to Christianity, to Islam, of course, and any other. At the same time, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism are all considered part of the national cradle of Hinduism, and therefore they're accepted. So now the general feeling is that everything originated from India. And the government currently in power, which is the BJP government, and all the supporters, strongly oppose what has been coined as the Aryan invasion theory by some Westerners in the 19th century. No one talks any longer of invasion. But the very fact that the so-called Aryans, who identified themselves with northern Indians, and especially the priests, meaning the Brahmins, could have come from outside India, is alien to that political framework which I just mentioned. So, did the Indo-European languages and everything that goes with it, like the Vedic culture, come from outside? Is really a hot point.
And it seems like it's perhaps difficult to move too far away from politics. It seems that whichever way we look, we end up. So there are aspects of politics in the book related to these historical findings. Did you feel a bit anxious about incorporating politics into a book?
No, I'm not. I'm a political journalist. I've been writing with colleagues political thrillers taking place in Yemen, in Russia, in the Middle East. That's very much part of what I'm doing every day, because a novel can be very often a way to tell the truth, which is otherwise a bit complicated to tell in simple terms when you just write essays. That being said, in India, a lot of people are entering that political fields without even realizing it is political. And I think this is what that novel tries to convey.
Now, speaking of journalism, as you said, you're a political journalist. You concentrate mostly on the Middle East, is that right, in your field of expertise?
Right, and increasingly on India.
Okay. Now, many years ago, you were working in Bahrain. What was that like as an experience as a journalist?
I was a beginner. I was a young journalist. So I had to learn everything about living in different environments. It was not that difficult, actually. It was not always very easy from an economic point of view, because as a freelance I had to sell articles at a time when the French currency was falling and the dollar, to which the Bahraini dinar is pegged, was going up. That being said, finding stories was less difficult than trying to convince my publishers that it was interesting for the French public. So, no, it was quite, as you say, in retrospect, it was formative years, whatever that means.
Yes, exactly. You learn a lot.
I learned a lot, and things which are still of use to me.
Yes. What sorts of things? What has it taught you that has helped you still today in your career?
Well, I continue to follow very closely the situation in the Arabian Peninsula and the Gulf, and things which are happening today are less difficult to understand for me than they would if I had not been living among Bahrainis and the foreigners living in Bahrain as well. Mm-hmm. So I can see continuity. I can see also breaking points, like the invasion of Kuwait was very much a breaking point. But at the same time, there was some consistency with the designs of Iraq over Kuwait when Kuwait became independent in the 60s, which I knew because I had studied that area. So I was not that surprised. But the reaction of the people, I mean, were bare in the following weeks after the invasions. They said things that they usually don't because they're very polite and it's always rounded up, wrapped up in niceties, and they just dispensed with the niceties, after the invasion, and they said exactly what they felt. Yeah.
Ah, interesting.
So I could see the two levels.
And as a journalist working in the Middle East today, what I mean, the situation seems to have evolved a lot. Is it very dangerous for journalists to be working in the Middle East today? Is it more dangerous than before, or are there different challenges?
In itself, it's not dangerous. That is, I remember when the war between Iran and Iraq broke up. It was in September 80. I was living in Bahrain, and all the families were calling the expatriates living in Bahrain, saying, "Be careful, there is a war going on." And everyone was saying, "No, the sales just started, we're going to the market." I mean, you're talking about something happening 400, 500 kilometers from here. That being said, when you look at the region, I mean, there have been 3 major conflicts in just 30 years. So yes, it's a dangerous area, which doesn't mean that everyone is at risk. So as a journalist, as long as you're not going to the front, you're not at risk, but you can be expelled, you can be put in, not in jail, but I mean in a police station for several hours or several days if you start digging too much, because these are not areas where free press is necessarily considered a major thing.
And you yourself, I believe, have been under pressure at different points in your career, political pressure. I noticed that on your blog in French, you've written about an experience which was probably quite shocking, where you received pressure from a particular ambassador at one stage.
Yeah, it was the Saudi ambassador. He kind of threatened me, but I was in Paris. I mean, I was not running any risk. He just threatened to block my entry to his country forever. And actually, I was denied a visa subsequently. But then several years later, he said, "Now, if you want to go, you're free to go." But the occasion did not arise. These are not really personal risk. I mean, being banned from a country is never pleasant, but I mean, it's not like you lose your freedom, you lose your life, you're hurt or anything like this. And if you just want to be cozy and travel everywhere, just don't do your job. You cease to be a journalist. Since it was never an option for me, these are the kind of risks I'm ready to take. I mean, they're not so serious.
Well, thank you very much, Olivier Da Lage, for being my guest in Paris Live and talking to us a little bit about your book, Mr. Singh's Rickshaw, which is in English and in French. And it's a murder mystery with a little bit of a historical tweak. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for the invitation.